Hi guys, so today this is going to be the first lesson for Pre-AP Pre-Cal, and basically what these videos are is just a chance for you guys to re-watch something that you might have struggled with in class, or review something before a test, and just gives you a chance to kind of look through the notes again, but actually be walked through them instead of just looking at your notes and not being able to remember what you wrote down or why. So hopefully these will be able to help you guys when you're reviewing or if you're absent or something along those lines. Again, if you have any questions about anything that's on here, just feel free to send me an email or just to come ask me about it the next morning or talk to me about it in class. Alright, so this very first day we're starting off, hopefully pretty simple, and we're just going to talk about angle measurement. Alright, so you've looked at a lot of this stuff actually before, and the first thing with measuring angles that you guys learned about was you learned about the quadrants. Okay, so we know the very first quadrant is up in the top right, and then the number order goes in a C direction. So then my next one is quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and then quadrant 4. Now if I were to label these lines to help me figure out where some of these angles are, a lot of these again you already know. So my very first one, 0, is going to be right here. And then up here at the top, I would have 90 degrees, because that makes a right angle. Then a straight line, I know, is 180 degrees. And then down at the bottom, 3/4 of the way around would be 270 degrees. And if I were to go in that full circle, I know a full circle has 360 degrees. So 0 and 360, those angles actually end in the same place. And we're going to talk about a word for that here at the end. Alright, so when we measure an angle, we basically have to have a couple of things. So the first thing we need to have is our initial side. So we always start with the initial side when I draw an angle. And that initial side, when I draw it on a coordinate plane like this, that initial side is right here at 0 degrees. Then, wherever I end my angle, that's called my terminal side. So that's where I end. And then in order to draw an angle, the last thing I need to do is I go from my initial side to my terminal side and I draw an angle to show the direction that I'm going. And that's how I would draw my angle. So let's say this was a 45-degree angle. That's how I would draw it. I have my initial side, my terminal side, 45 degrees away from my initial, and I have that arrow showing my direction. Right, so sometimes we'll draw these angles actually on my quadrants, so sometimes I could draw it like this, and sometimes I'll draw it without it. Alright, so we're going to practice a little bit. We're going to draw a couple of angles. So the first one is going to be 137 degrees, and we're going to go ahead and draw these on my quadrants here. So 137 degrees, I know, again, I know those border parts. I know I have 0, 90, 180, that doesn't want to draw, and 270, and then all the way around would be 360. And I know that 137 is less than 180 and more than 90, so it's going to be somewhere in this quadrant. So it's going to start at 0, and it's going to end right there at 137 degrees. Alright, now I have a new one, negative 60 degrees. Okay, so if I have a negative angle, now negative angles actually go in the opposite direction. Okay, so a negative 60 degrees, what I would do is instead of going from 0 to 60, I'm actually going to go the opposite direction, 60 degrees. So if I were to go backwards, I know this would be a negative 90, which means negative 60 would be in the fourth quadrant. So that's my negative 60 degree angle. Okay, so it's all about the direction of my arrow. So my positive direction is the normal direction my quadrants go in. Negative, I'm going backwards. Alright, 500 degrees. Now we know 500 degrees is more than a full circle, right? Because a full circle would be 360. So to find the terminal side of this angle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 360 to figure out that this is actually going to be a full circle and 140 degrees. So right now I can draw a 140 degree angle. 140 degree angle is going to be in the second quadrant because it's between 180 and 90. Now the only thing that's different here is going to be when I draw my arrow. So if I just drew my arrow like this, that wouldn't be a 500 degree angle, that would be a 140 degree angle. So instead what I need to do to show that it's 500 degrees, I had that extra 360. So my arrow needs to show that by going around in a full circle and then ending at 140 degrees. So that's how I would draw my 500 degree angle. Alright, then my last one here is a negative 223. Again, this is just practice with my negatives. So if I were to go in the opposite direction, I know I'm going to go this way. So if I go that way, I would reach negative 90, then I would reach negative 180, then I would reach negative 270. So I know negative 223 is going to fall in that second quadrant, and I'm going to go back that way. And that's my negative 2. Now, whenever you're drawing these angles in the quadrants, they don't have to be perfect, okay? It's not going to be, well, actually, you technically drew a negative 220 degree angle and not a negative 223 degree angle. Right? It's not going to have to be that perfect and that technical. You want it to be approximate, you know, so if I have a 90, I don't want to draw a 91 degree angle over here, okay? I would probably try to draw it a little bit closer to 90 degrees. But it doesn't need to be perfect. What's important is that you're drawing it in the right quadrant. Alright, so now that we know how to draw angles, we're going to talk about a word that we actually just saw at the very beginning. I said we're going to come back to it. And that is a coterminal angle. Okay, so coterminal angles, if you think about your prefixes here, co, alright, co means together, like cooperate, or a co-worker. So coterminal, and we know terminal side of the angle is where it ends. So coterminal angles are angles that end in the same place. So I want to find angles that end in the same place. So if I have a 20 degree angle, I know that's going to be in the first quadrant, so there's my 20 degree angle. If I wanted to find a coterminal angle that's 20 degrees, there's actually a couple different ways I can do this. So the first is I can look at this picture and say, well, if that's my 20 degree angle going that way, I want it to end at this line, I can just draw my arrow going that way. And if a full circle is 360 and that little in-between part is 20, then I know going that opposite way is going to be a negative 340 degrees. So there's one way I could find a coterminal angle. Alright, another way is using that example that we did at the very beginning, or with the 500 degrees. 500 we knew ended at the same place as 140. The only difference was instead of stopping, I went in a full circle. So I can do the same thing here. So I also could have a coterminal angle that was 360 plus 20. And a coterminal angle would be 380 degrees. So I've got negative 340 and then 380. And if I want to, I could find another one. Let's say again, I know I'm going to end here. Let's go in the negative direction, but let's go a full circle in the negative direction. So I would go around 360 degrees, and then I would go another negative 340 degrees, which puts me at a negative 700 degrees. So all of those angles, 20, negative 340, 380, and negative 700, those are all coterminal angles because they all have the same terminal side. Doesn't matter what direction I go in or how many circles I make, they all end in the same place. So if you guys can see here, there's actually a shorter way to find these than drawing the pictures and trying to figure out different ways to do this. And it has to do with how many degrees there are in a circle. And so you guys can probably see the easiest way to find coterminal angles is just to take your angle, and then I can either add or I can subtract 360 degrees. And that's going to give me a coterminal angle. So like on this first example, I did 20 minus 360. And that gives me negative 340. Then I did 20 plus 360, and then I did 20 minus 360, and then I subtracted 360 again to get to my final answer. Okay, so you can add or subtract 360 as many times as you want. So how I'm actually going to write that is plus or minus 360 n, and n just means any number, any whole number. So I can add or subtract 360 as many times as I want to get coterminal angles. What that also means about coterminal angles then is that there's actually an infinite number. You can't just find one coterminal angle and say that's the only one. There's actually an infinite number of correct answers here. So if I'm not very specific in my directions, every single one of you could give me a different answer if you wanted to. Alright guys, so that's just the basic introduction to angle measurement. Hopefully it was pretty simple. Again, I hope you guys can just use these videos to help you guys if you have questions when I'm not around, or if you just want to look back through your notes and you can't really remember what it was you came up with. But we'll have more stuff coming up in this unit, and again, there should be a video for everything that's on there. And if you guys have questions, just send me an email or come see me.